The encounter in the Crimson Nebula. The Crimson Nebula shimmered like a sea of molten rubies, its swirling gases painting the void of space with hues of red and gold. Cale adjusted the controls of his ship, the Starblade, as it glided through the nebula's ethereal currents. He was no stranger to danger, but this place felt different, alive almost. His mission was simple: scout for rare minerals and report back to the human colonies. But something about the nebula called to him, a whisper in the void that tugged at his curiosity. As he navigated deeper, his sensors pinged. An anomaly. Cale's heart quickened as he steered the Starblaze toward the signal. There, floating amidst the crimson clouds, was a massive structure, an alien artifact, ancient and otherworldly. Its surface gleamed with intricate patterns, glowing faintly as if alive. Cale's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary find. He suited up and stepped out of the ship, his boots magnetizing to the artifact's metallic surface. The air was thick with energy, a hum that resonated in his bones. As he approached a central chamber, the patterns on the walls began to pulse, reacting to his presence. Cale's hand hovered over his blaster, but curiosity won out. He reached out, touching the wall. The chamber erupted in light. Cale shielded his eyes as the artifact came alive, its core opening to reveal a crystalline pod inside. A figure stirred. Cale's pulse raced as the pod's surface dissolved, releasing a cloud of shimmering mist. When it cleared, he saw her. She was breathtaking. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue with faint bioluminescent markings that glowed softly. Her hair, long and silvery, cascaded like liquid moonlight. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, were a striking shade of violet, filled with a mixture of confusion and wonder. She wore a sleek, form-fitting suit that seemed to be part of her, shifting and shimmering with her movements. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice melodic yet hesitant, as if speaking for the first time in centuries. Cale swallowed hard, his mind racing. "I'm Cale, a human explorer, and you." She tilted her head, studying him with those mesmerizing eyes. "I am Zainara, the last of my kind." Her voice carried a weight of sorrow, but also a spark of hope. "You have awakened me. Why?" Cale hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I didn't mean to. I was just exploring, but I'm glad I found you." Zainara stepped closer, her movements graceful and fluid. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek. Cale's breath hitched at the contact, her touch sending a jolt of warmth through him. "You are different," she murmured. "Your energy, it's unlike anything I've felt before." Cale's heart pounded as he looked into her eyes. There was something magnetic about her, a connection that defied logic. "Zainara," he said softly, "I don't know what's happening, but I want to help you, whatever you need." She smiled, a small, tentative curve of her lips. "Thank you, Cale, but there is much you do not understand. My people, we were destroyed by a great evil, and now they will come for me." Before Cale could respond, the Starblade's alarms blared. His comms crackled to life. "Cale, we've got incoming ships, unknown origin, but they're heading straight for you." Zainara's eyes widened with fear. "They're here, the Vorax, we must leave now." Cale grabbed her hand, his grip firm. "Come on, we'll figure this out together." As they raced back to the Starblade, the Crimson Nebula seemed to close in around them, its beauty now tinged with danger. Cale didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. And as he glanced at Zainara, her hand still in his, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The forbidden connection. The Starblade hurtled through the void, its engines humming as Cale and Zainara left the Crimson Nebula behind. The ship's interior was dimly lit, the soft glow of control panels casting shadows on the walls. Zainara sat in the co-pilot's seat, her violet eyes scanning the stars with a mixture of awe and sadness. Cale stole glances at her, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why did he feel so drawn to her? "Tell me about your people," Cale said, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, careful not to overwhelm her. Zainara turned to him, her expression softening. "My people were called the Zainari. We lived in harmony with the stars, our civilization spanning countless worlds. We were explorers like you, but also guardians of ancient knowledge." Her voice carried a melodic quality, each word painting a vivid picture in Cale's mind. "What happened to them?" Cale asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Zainara's gaze dropped, her bioluminescent markings dimming slightly. The Vorax came. They are a ruthless species driven by greed and destruction. They sought our technology, our secrets. When we refused to surrender, they attacked. My people fought bravely, but... Her voice trailed off, and Kale saw the pain in her eyes. You don't have to say more, he said quickly, reaching out to touch her hand. The moment his fingers brushed hers, a spark passed between them, a connection that felt almost electric. Zainara looked up, her eyes locking with his. You are kind, Kale, she said softly. Your energy, it is warm like the suns of my homeworld. I have not felt such warmth in a long time. Kale's heart swelled at her words. He didn't fully understand what she meant by energy, but he could feel it too, a pull, a bond that defied explanation. Zainara, I don't know what's happening between us, but I want to help you, whatever it takes. She smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her face. Thank you, but the Vorax will not stop until they find me. I carry the last remnants of my people's knowledge. If they capture me, all will be lost. Kale nodded, his determination hardening. Then we'll stay one step ahead of them. We'll find a way to keep you safe. As the hours passed, the two grew closer. Zainara shared stories of her world, its towering crystal cities and vast oceans of liquid light. Kale told her about Earth, its blue skies and green forests, and the resilience of humanity. They laughed, they dreamed, and in the quiet moments they simply sat together, their hands intertwined. But their peace was short-lived. The Starblade's sensors suddenly blared, snapping them back to reality. Kale, we've got company, the ship's AI announced. Vorax ships closing fast. Kale's jaw tightened as he checked the readings. 3 Vorax cruisers were on an intercept course, their sleek, menacing forms cutting through the void. Hold on, he said, gripping the controls. This is going to get rough. Zainara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steadying him. We will face this together, she said, her voice firm. Kale nodded, his resolve unwavering. He activated the ship's thrusters, sending the Starblade into a series of evasive maneuvers. The Vorax ships opened fire, their energy beams slicing through the darkness. Kale dodged and weaved, his piloting skills pushed to the limit. We can't outrun them forever, Kale muttered, his eyes darting to the fuel gauge. We need a plan. Zainara's eyes narrowed as she studied the Vorax ships. Their shields are strongest at the front. If we can get behind them, we might stand a chance. Kale grinned. I like the way you think. With a burst of speed, the Starblade looped around, slipping behind the lead Vorax cruiser. Kale unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, targeting the ship's engines. The cruiser shuddered, its shields flickering before collapsing. Direct hit, Kale shouted, pumping his fist in the air. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining 2 ships closed in, their weapons locking onto the Starblade. Brace yourself, Kale yelled as the ship rocked under the impact. Alarms blared and smoke filled the cockpit. Zainara's markings flared brightly as she focused her energy. Kale, give me control of the weapons, she said, her voice calm but urgent. What, how? Kale asked, bewildered. Trust me, she replied, her eyes glowing with intensity. Without hesitation, Kale handed over the controls. Zainara's hands moved over the console with practiced ease, her alien technology interfacing seamlessly with the ship's systems. The Starblade's weapons charged, emitting a brilliant blue light. Now, Zainara shouted, unleashing a concentrated beam of energy. It struck the nearest Vorax ship, piercing its hull and causing a chain reaction of explosions. The ship disintegrated, its debris scattering into the void. The final cruiser hesitated, its commander seemingly unsure how to proceed. Kale seized the opportunity, firing a volley of missiles that crippled the ship's engines. Let's get out of here, he said, steering the Starblade away from the battle. As the Vorax ships faded into the distance, Kale let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. That was incredible, he said, turning to Zainara. How did you do that? She smiled, her markings dimming as she relaxed. My people's technology is adaptable. I simply connected with your ship's systems. Kale shook his head in amazement. You're full of surprises, you know that? Zainara's smile widened, and for a moment the weight of their situation seemed to lift. But Kale knew the Vorax would return stronger and more determined. They needed a plan, a safe haven where they could regroup. "There's a frozen planet nearby," Kale said, pulling up a star map. "It's uninhabited, but it has resources we can use. We'll lay low there and figure out our next move." Zainara nodded, her expression resolute. "Wherever you lead, I will follow." As the Starblade set course for the frozen planet, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but together they were unstoppable. And in the quiet moments as they shared stories and dreams, Kale realized that his connection to Zainara was more than just survival. It was something deeper, something that transcended the stars. The dance of fire and ice. The frozen planet loomed ahead, its surface a vast expanse of ice and snow shimmering under the light of a distant sun. Kale guided the Starblade through the thin atmosphere, the ship's thrusters roaring as they descended toward the icy terrain. The temperature outside was lethal, but the ship's systems were holding, for now. "This place is beautiful," Zainara said, her voice filled with wonder as she gazed at the frozen landscape. Her bioluminescent markings glowed softly, casting a gentle light in the dim cockpit. "Beautiful but deadly," Kale replied, his eyes scanning the terrain for a safe landing spot. "We'll need to be careful. The cold out there can kill in minutes." Zainara nodded, her expression serious. "I can withstand extreme temperatures, but you will need protection." Kale smirked. "Don't worry about me. I've got a survival suit that can handle this, but we'll need to find shelter fast. The Starblade won't last long in this cold." He set the ship down in a shallow valley, the ice cracking under the weight of the landing gear. As the engines powered down, Kale grabbed his gear and activated his survival suit, its thermal layers humming to life. Zainara followed, her sleek alien suit adapting seamlessly to the environment. The air outside was biting, the wind howling like a wild beast. Kale's breath formed clouds of vapor as he stepped onto the ice, his boots crunching with each step. Zainara moved beside him, her movements graceful despite the harsh conditions. "There," Kale said, pointing to a cluster of jagged ice formations in the distance. "Those look like caves. We can take shelter there." They trudged through the snow, the wind whipping around them. The journey was grueling, but Kale's determination never wavered. Zainara stayed close, her presence a constant source of comfort. When they finally reached the caves, Kale activated a portable heater, its warm glow filling the space. "This should do for now," he said, setting up a makeshift camp. "We'll rest here and figure out our next move." Zainara sat beside him, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the heater. "Kale," she said softly, "thank you for everything." He turned to her, his heart swelling at the sincerity in her voice. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." She reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through him, a reminder of the connection they shared. "Your world, it sounds so different from mine," she said. "Tell me more about it." Kale smiled, leaning back against the icy wall. "Earth is alive. The skies are blue, the forests are green, and the oceans stretch as far as the eye can see. It's not perfect, but it's home." Zainara's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "I would like to see it someday." "You will," Kale promised. "Once we get through this, I'll take you there. You'll love it." As they talked, the hours slipped away. The cold outside seemed distant, the warmth between them growing stronger with each passing moment. Zainara's laughter filled the cave, a sound that made Kale's heart race. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, strong, intelligent, and beautiful in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. But their peace was shattered by a low rumble, the ground trembling beneath them. Kale jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. What was that? Zainara's markings flared brightly as she focused her senses. "Something is coming," she said, her voice tense. Before Kale could respond, the cave entrance was blocked by a massive creature, a hulking beast of ice and muscle, its glowing eyes fixed on them. The creature roared, its breath freezing the air. "Stay behind me," Kale said, stepping in front of Zainara. But she placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm. "We face this together," she said, her voice steady. The creature lunged, its claws slashing through the air. Kale fired his blaster, the shots bouncing off the beast's icy armor. Zainara stepped forward, her hands glowing with energy. She unleashed a burst of light, striking the creature and causing it to stagger. "Now," she shouted. Kale didn't hesitate. He aimed for the creature's eyes, firing a concentrated blast that shattered its icy armor. The beast roared in pain, collapsing to the ground. For a moment there was silence. Then Zainara turned to Kale, her eyes filled with admiration. "You are brave," she said. "And you're incredible," Kale replied, his voice filled with awe. Their eyes met, and in that moment the world seemed to fade away. Kale reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. Zainara leaned into his touch, her breath warm against his skin. "Kale," she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't need words. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of connection, of a bond that transcended species and galaxies. When they finally pulled apart, Zainara's eyes were filled with emotion. "Kale," she said softly, "whatever happens, I am glad I found you." "Me too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. As they sat together in the warmth of the heater, the storm raging outside, Kale knew that their journey was far from over. But in that moment, with Zainara by his side, he felt invincible. The battle for unity. The storm outside the cave raged on, the wind howling like a vengeful spirit. Inside, Kale and Zainara sat close, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The heater's glow cast flickering shadows on the icy walls, creating an intimate cocoon amidst the chaos. The kiss they had shared still lingered in the air, a silent promise of something deeper, something unbreakable. "We can't stay here forever," Kale said, his voice low but resolute. "The Vorax will find us eventually. We need a plan." Zainara nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight. "We must strike back. If we can disable their command ship, we can buy ourselves time." Kale raised an eyebrow. "Disable their command ship, that's a tall order. Do you have a plan?" A small smile played on Zainara's lips. "I do, but it will require precision, courage, and a little bit of luck." Kale grinned. "Luck, never been my strong suit, but I've got plenty of courage. Let's hear it." Zainara leaned closer, her voice steady as she outlined her plan. "The Vorax command ship is heavily shielded, but it has a weakness, its power core. If we can infiltrate the ship and overload the core, it will cripple their fleet." Kale's mind raced as he processed the information. Infiltrating their ship won't be easy. They'll be on high alert after our last encounter. "That's where I come in," Zainara said. "My people's technology can mask our presence, but only for a short time. We'll need to move quickly." Kale nodded, his determination hardening. "All right, let's do this." They spent the next few hours preparing, gathering supplies, and fine-tuning their plan. Zainara used her abilities to modify the Starblade systems, creating a cloaking device that would hide them from the Vorax sensors. Kale checked his weapons, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. As they worked, the connection between them grew stronger. Every glance, every touch, spoke of a bond that went beyond words. Kale found himself drawn to Zainara in ways he couldn't explain, her presence a constant source of strength and inspiration. When they were ready, they boarded the Starblade and set course for the Vorax fleet. The ship's cloaking device activated, rendering them invisible to enemy sensors. The tension in the cockpit was palpable as they approached the command ship, a massive vessel bristling with weapons. "This is it," Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back." Zainara placed a hand on his arm, her touch calming. "We will succeed, together." They docked the Starblade in a hidden bay, slipping into the command ship undetected. The interior was dark and foreboding, the walls lined with alien technology that hummed with malevolent energy. Kale and Zainara moved silently through the corridors, their movements synchronized as if they had trained together for years. They reached the power core without incident, but their luck ran out as they began the sabotage. A squad of Vorax soldiers appeared, their weapons trained on the intruders. "Intruders, seize them," The leader barked, his voice guttural and harsh. Kale didn't hesitate. He fired his blaster, taking down 2 soldiers before ducking behind a console for cover. Zainara unleashed a burst of energy, her bioluminescent markings flaring brightly as she disabled the remaining soldiers. "Hurry," she urged, her voice tense. "We don't have much time." Kale worked quickly, overriding the power core's controls. The ship's alarms blared, red lights flashing as the core began to overload. "It's done," he shouted. "Let's go." They sprinted back to the Starblade, the ship shaking violently as the power core destabilized. The Vorax soldiers were in chaos, their commands drowned out by the blaring alarms. Kale and Zainara reached the ship just as the first explosions rocked the command vessel. "Hold on," Kale yelled, firing up the engines. The Starblade shot out of the bay, narrowly avoiding the debris as the command ship erupted in a massive explosion. The shockwave sent the Starblade spinning, but Kale managed to regain control. He glanced at Zainara, who was breathing heavily but unharmed. "We did it," he said, a grin spreading across his face. Zainara smiled, her eyes filled with relief. "We did, but this is only the beginning. The Vorax will not stop until they are defeated." Kale's expression turned serious. "Then we'll keep fighting together." As they flew away from the wreckage, the stars stretching out before them, Kale felt a sense of hope. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. And with Zainara by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. Eclipsed hearts. The Starblade drifted through the quiet expanse of space, the remnants of the Vorax command ship fading into the distance. The cockpit was bathed in the soft glow of the control panels, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop to the silence. Kale leaned back in his seat, his body still buzzing with adrenaline. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Vorax. But he knew the fight was far from over. Zainara sat beside him, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. She was quiet, her bioluminescent markings pulsing softly as she processed everything that had happened. Kale glanced at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and affection. She was incredible, strong, brave, and beautiful in ways that defied description. "What's next?" Kale asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to his words. Zainara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "We must rally others to our cause. The Vorax are a threat to all civilizations, not just mine. If we can unite the galaxy against them, we stand a chance." Kale nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "Earth has allies. I can reach out to them, see if they'll join us." Zainara smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her face. "Your people are resilient, Kale. I have seen it in you. Together we can inspire others to fight." Kale reached out, taking her hand in his. Her skin was warm, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through him. "Zainara," he said softly, "whatever happens, I'm glad I found you. You've changed everything." Her eyes softened and she squeezed his hand. "And you have given me hope, Kale. Hope that my people's legacy will not be forgotten. Hope that we can build a future together." The moment was interrupted by a faint beeping from the control panel. Kale frowned, turning to check the readings. "We're receiving a signal," he said, his brow furrowing. "It's faint, but it's definitely there." Zainara leaned closer, her eyes scanning the data. "It's coming from a nearby system, a distress call." Kale's heart sank. "We can't ignore it. If someone's in trouble, we have to help." Zainara nodded, her expression resolute. "We will, but we must be cautious. The Vorax could be behind this." The Starblade changed course, heading toward the source of the signal. As they approached, a small, damaged ship came into view. It was adrift, its hull scorched and battered. Kale's stomach churned as he recognized the markings on the ship. It was human. "That's a colonial transport," he said, his voice tight with worry. "What happened here?" They docked with the ship, their suits protecting them from the vacuum of space. The interior was dark and cold, the air thick with the scent of burnt metal. Kale's heart ached as they moved through the corridors, the signs of a fierce battle evident everywhere. In the ship's control room, they found the source of the distress call, a young woman barely conscious, slumped over the console. Kale rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he checked her pulse. She's alive, he said, relief flooding his voice. Zainara knelt beside him, her hands glowing softly as she used her abilities to stabilize the woman. She is injured, but she will survive, Zainara said, her voice calm and reassuring. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Thank you, she whispered, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. I thought we were alone. You're safe now, Kale said, his voice gentle. What happened here? The woman's eyes filled with tears as she recounted the attack. The Vorax, they came out of nowhere. They destroyed our convoy. I'm the only one left. Kale's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. We'll make them pay for this, he said, his voice filled with determination. Zainara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steadying him. We will, but first we must ensure her safety. They brought the woman aboard the Starblade, tending to her wounds and providing her with food and water. As she rested, Kale and Zainara discussed their next steps. We need to warn Earth, Kale said, his voice urgent. If the Vorax are attacking human colonies, they need to know. Zainara nodded, her expression serious. And we must gather allies. The galaxy must unite against this threat. Kale reached out, taking her hand in his. We'll do it together. No matter what happens, we'll face it side by side. Zainara smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. Together, she agreed. As the Starblade set course for Earth, Kale felt a sense of purpose unlike anything he had ever known. The road ahead would be difficult, but with Zainara by his side, he knew they could overcome anything. Their love had transcended species and galaxies, and it would be their greatest strength in the battles to come.